Hi friends, welcome back into my studio and welcome into a new video. Today I'm going to be doing another gouache landscape tutorial, but this time it will be a little different. As you all know, I always advocate for working from references, always trying to learn directly from nature whenever you can, to go outside and sketch outside or to work from photographs. But also, as you know, whenever I work from the reference, I like to incorporate something of my own into the landscape. I really like composing the landscapes, and it's probably my most favorite subject to paint, the landscape. And this is something that I always keep on my mind, I always think about it, and I always try to create the images on my mind of what I want to paint next. And whenever I paint these images from my mind, I feel most satisfied with my work. So naturally, I get a lot of questions asking me, how do I go about creating an imaginary landscape and make it look real? And actually, during the art show that I had with my students, one of the ladies at the gallery, she came up to me and she told me something like, "Oh, isn't it so nice that you've been to all of these amazing places and you got a chance to paint them?" To what I said, that actually none of these places are real. All of these are imagined. They don't exist. She said, like, this is amazing because they look so believable. They look so real. And this is something that I really treasure in my art and really enjoy developing even further, is how can I create something from my mind and still make it look real. So today I decided to paint another landscape together, and I'll share a few steps of my process, how I think about composing a landscape, what are my steps, what are my kind of decision making questions that I ask myself. And one and probably the most important tip that I can give to anybody is that you have to start painting from references. You have to start building your internal library correctly, so that when you start imagining something, you have the material inside of your mind that you can use, and that material is kind of the correct one because you've practiced painting mountains and trees and seascapes or whatever. You've already tried that from reference, so you remember it being kind of the correct subject, and you don't have to stress about whether you're using the right colors, whether this is going to be the right form for that subject. You can always try and search for more references whenever you're creating something, so that is never something you have to cross out of your practice at all. At some point you can always use references, and you can use references for just different parts of your landscapes. You can use different references, combine them into one landscape, and it's something that I always do whenever I paint from the reference. I try to incorporate something of my own into it too. But working from reference, working from location will definitely improve your library inside of your head, and you will have more material sort of inside of your mind that you can use later to create something of my own. So that is the first and that is the most important tip for creating something from your imagination. So go into more specific steps of creating a plan for your painting, something that you want to think about ahead of time before you start painting, especially if you're working with fast drying mediums like gouache and watercolor, is what kind of landscape are you trying to create, and what kind of elements into your landscape you're trying to incorporate. So for example, is it a mountain landscape? Is it a forest? Is it a farm field? Is it a valley? It can be anything. It can be a combination of a few different elements. I always try to go for at least 2-3 different elements. Like I will have mountains, I will have a forest, and I'll put a river and a lake. And this helps me with creating a more interesting composition, with putting more elements into my painting and kind of creating more visual interest in it. but you can always just start sketching with pencil and see what you like, what you don't like. But having a plan in general ahead of time will make it easier once you start painting and once you start making your next steps of the plan. So the step number 2 is deciding what kind of mood are you trying to convey with your painting. This is always very helpful when you're trying to create a realistic landscape, because a landscape always has a certain kind, a mood to it, a lighting to it that brings kind of everything together and puts an idea behind your art. It can be either very energetic, very summery and bright landscape. It can be something cloudy and moody. It can be a nighttime landscape and something dark. So thinking about this ahead of time will help you plan other decisions like choosing your lighting situation and choosing your colors. Lighting situation is another very important step because you have to think about the position of the sun and the weather. So the position of the sun throughout the day changes, as you all know, and that changes the way your highlights and your shadows behave in the landscape. So if it's sunrise or the sunset, you know that the highlights are going to be rather on the sides of the subject and your shadows are going to be longer. If it's noon and the sun is straight up, then you know that your highlight is going to be directly on top of your subject and your shadow is going to be directly underneath the subject. This is something you also have to plan ahead of time because that will change the colors that you're using. For example, if you're painting a sunrise, it usually has a little bit of the cooler highlights, a little bit of the cooler shadows. If you are painting a sunset, it usually creates a more warmer, more orangey highlights and more warmer colors overall. If you're painting overcast day, then it's going to have a more kind of grayish tones to it and more unified lighting. Sketching colors ahead of time is also not a good idea. You can try mixing colors and see how they're working together. This is also something I'm going to do today in my painting. It becomes more intuitive as you go along and you start working on more paintings. So it's not something you have to do absolutely every single time, but it's something that definitely helps. And the final step would be trying out different types of compositions before you start painting. So like small thumbnail sketches, as you're gonna see me creating before I start doing my painting. These sketches will help you make a decision how you want your composition to work, what kind of elements you want to include, and also helps you to see maybe something's too much or something's not enough and you need to add a little bit more. It also helps you work out your horizon line to decide where do you want to position your sky. Do you want your sky to dominate your composition? Do you want the landscape to dominate the composition? And all of these decisions are always helpful to make ahead of time. So once you start painting, you are ready and you have a plan and it doesn't take as long. Sorry for that message. So today I'm going to be working in my Moleskine watercolor sketchbook. You've seen this in my other landscape videos. And something that I like to do for my studies is to put my sketches on one side and a few notes and a few colors that I try out for my painting, and put my sketch on the other side. So whenever I go back to them, I can kind of see my decision-making process before I started doing it, just in case I try to work out a different idea next time and give another thumbnail sketch a try. And I have my colors. Sometimes I would even put the notes to what colors I mixed before. And it's something that I've done for the limited color palette here, as you can see, for this cottage sketch. I think I only used 3 colors, and I just tried to work out different grays and everything for this illustration. So this is something we're also gonna do today. And let's begin. So first I will try out a few different compositions. I think I will be working vertically, but we'll see. I will try a few horizontal thumbnail sketches just in case. So as I said, I really like mountains and I really like a few different elements, so I think I'll put my horizon line up higher a little bit just to see how that works. Let me make it a little thicker so you can see this on the video. And one thing that I really like about landscape is that you can just add whatever shape you want to your mountains, to your rivers. Nobody really gonna go back and compare how does that really look in real life, because this is from your imagination. So I'm trying to always think of my background, my middle ground, and my foreground when I create my sketches. Because that also helps me plan my colors. And because as you know, that's something in the background is going to be more subtle, less saturated, something in the middle ground sort of going to be in the middle, and something in the foreground is going to be with the highest contrast and the highest saturation. So I'm just considering putting a river here, putting a small mountain here, and then mountains in the back, and some trees over on this side, maybe some rocks. That is one. If we try something horizontal, and let's try putting your horizon line a little bit lower this time, see how that works out. But I still like my mountains to sort of dominate the background. Right now I'm kind of going a little more loose with the mountains, not really creating any specific shapes. What if we still did kind of a hill closer up here and maybe extra one in there, sort of not as rocky as the mountain, would be a little softer, and this one would be even lighter. This is a little darker to show that it's closer to us. And if we're putting some more water, maybe some like rocks here, maybe bring in another kind of rocky formation here, and maybe some trees growing on this side over the rocks. And I definitely want my color palette to be more warmer sunset colors. Another thing that is always helpful to do when you define your composition is to put the direction of the light. So for example, if I put the light coming from this direction, then all of these trees will be highlighted on one side, and the mountain is going to be highlighted, so it would have shadows on the other side. Probably still put something in here over these rocks, maybe a bush or some taller tree. over here, just like on the side to help frame it. What if we try just one more vertical one? With the lower background this time, because we already have one vertical with the higher horizon line. I mean, not the background, horizon line. I'm gonna try one with the lower one. Still have some mountains in there, and I'm leaving a little bit more of the sky this time. Again, this is very experimental at this point. And if we have a river kind of going into the distance, like we have bigger rocks in the foreground here, kind of smaller. If we create like some of the rocks here, and this would be kind of a forest that's building into a hill, so you have taller, darker trees up in the front, and then they'll kind of get softer and lighter as you go back up on the hill and into the distance. And maybe something here, but this would be more like a grassy area. Maybe some trees over here, maybe some trees up in a distance. Would have to be a little lighter, kind of went a little too dark with them. But this way I would kind of see more of the mountains. And then maybe some grassy area here. So this would be some rocks. Kind of like all of them, just to show you them a little bit closer on the camera. But I think I'm going to go with this one, with the horizontal one for my landscape. And maybe I'll try some of these next time. Right, let's start. First, to show you a little bit of my setup, I'm gonna have my mixing palette over here so you can see some of the colors that I am mixing and also the consistency of the paint that I'm using for this painting. I like to use very simple craft brushes. I don't usually use anything expensive for gouache paintings because I feel like gouache tends to ruin my brushes very quickly. Paints, the ones I'm going to be using, can be linked in the description below. I have a jar of water by my side, but I don't use it as much for mixing the paint. I sometimes just clean the brush if it gets really clogged up with the paint. But most of the time, I just wipe my paintbrush with just a piece of paper towel. And I also have a mist bottle, spray bottle, just to refresh the paints when they start drying up. So first, I am actually going to mask the edges of my future painting, just because I really like having clean lines. Okay, I hope you enjoy this happy polka dot little pattern on my masking tape. This is just regular washi tape, nothing fancy. So I'm gonna start with sketching my painting very lightly because I will be going over it anyway, so I'm not gonna have much left of my sketch which is why having thumbnails close to you is really helpful, because once you paint over the area, you might forget what you wanted to put in there, so you can kind of use your thumbnail as a reminder. Okay, so this is my horizon line. I think I will put it even lower. I really like my mountains to dominate the landscape, so I want to give more space to them. And also, as I mentioned, I'm gonna be painting a sunset landscape, but I don't like to put the sun directly into the painting with all of the orange and yellow colors. I like to put my sun somewhere to the side with just the highlights as an indication of the setting sun. Let's add a little bit of variety to this. So I'm gonna bring this mountain out here, and that one will be lighter in the back. I like painting rocky mountains because they create very interesting colors in the sunset. They kind of orangey, yellowish, contrasting with the bluish shadows. And again, since this is a sunset, the sun is going to be coming from the side, so I'm going to have more distinctive shadows. So I'm going to mass put them into it right away. So they kind of have an idea for the pattern of my mountains. Okay, something like this. I had a hill up on this side, so I think I'll just maybe put it here. I don't really like bringing things down symmetrically to the center, so I think I'm gonna push this one even a little bit out to the side over here, and there will be another overlapping on the other side there. Okay, so I've also had, let's maybe bring this edge a little bit out, kind of add the curve to the river. We had some rocky formations over here, closer to us, and I'm going to start with the mountains first. So if I want to put a tree right now on this side that's going to be overlapping, I'm going to kind of paint over this tree anyway, but I'll just put it in to see what everything looks like. Okay, and I'm gonna bring this, shows a little bit of kind of interest in the line here, so it's not like a straight line going in there. And again, I'm gonna be working from the back forward, so once I paint the mountains, I'm gonna also paint over all of my pencil work, but I'm still wanna just try out putting in some trees over here. And again, this is also gonna have some rocks over here and some grass, and I'm also gonna have some trees over here. We can also go as far as taking a picture just to take a picture of our sketch, because we've added more detail than what we had in the thumbnail. So once I start going from the back forward, once I paint over these mountains, I'll cover up this pencil work of these trees, so I'm not going to see them anymore. And just kind of to remind myself of an idea, I took the picture, and hopefully that will help us in the future. Okay, now let's pick out the colors. I'm gonna try to keep it very minimal. I have my sap green. We'll use my yellow ochre. Cerulean blue. I don't know. I'll use cerulean blue and Prussian blue, but I will see which one fits better. My white. Lemon yellow. I don't think I'm gonna use lemon yellow because this is more of a warmer setting. I'm gonna use my permanent yellow deep. What else we have? Burnt sienna, yes, for mixing dark greens. And I also, and the red ochre. I'm gonna use this one for mixing colors of the mountains. And I think this is it. Raw umber. I don't think I'm gonna use a raw umber. Okay, so these are all of the colors that I'm gonna be using. And I usually put them all in the same order always. I kind of go by the darkness. I start with the lightest color on one side. And finish with the darkest one on the bottom. Okay, so even though I prefer to work with a thicker consistency of the paint, I don't squeeze out too much, just so it doesn't all dry up in here before I even get a chance to use it. And I'll just spray it a little bit to keep it fresh. Okay, so first we're gonna try out just a few color mixes. So I'll get a little bit of the blue and some of the white to see how that looks for the sky. I think I need a little bit more saturation in the sky. And anytime you switch from one color to another, it's helpful to clean your brush just so you're not bringing as much of the old color into the new mix. Okay, I like that one. Actually, I think I'm gonna bring in Naples yellow too, just to lighten up one side of the sky with this. As a reminder, our light is coming from here, so we're gonna painting with our highlights on this side, shadows on this side, so the sky is also gonna be lighter on this side than on this side. Yes, that's gonna be our yellow. Now just to mix a few greens. Okay, this is gonna be like our mid-tone green. shadow, as always, is going to be a little bit cooler. And the highlights are gonna be yellowish warmer, so it was a little bit of the yellow and some of the yellow ochre. Like this, yes, I think that's good. Okay, and for our mountains, some of the red ochre, a little bit of the white, a little bit of orange to warm it up. A little bit more red, probably. I think that's good. And our highlights, our shadows on the mountains. Would be sort of purplish darker blue. All right, looking good. Just clean my brush before I start with the painting. I'm gonna bring a little bit bigger brush for the sky. So the sky ended up being a mix of cerulean blue, Prussian blue, and white. And I'm gonna be making the sky a little bit lighter as I go closer to our side where the sun is shining from. And what you can do is you can actually put in the lighter side here and kind of bring them closer together and let them meet in the middle somewhere. Actually, I'm gonna bring this out a little farther. This is gonna make a little bit more sense once we put more color into our landscape. But who knows, maybe I'll even go over and color it all with blue. We'll see how that looks with our composition. All right, now we can work on our mountains. And I kind of just like to create random shapes. Just to have something interesting going on. Once you add the shadows in it, it's gonna improve the design, sort of. Actually, these in the back should be a little lighter, kind of. And I would actually bring up a little bit of the greenery into the mountains. It's going to be very subtle, but would kind of help us bring the mountains kind of a little bit closer, and also help them transition better into the midground. So I'm trying to create a little bit more desaturated and a little bit kind of bluish greens, because everything that is far in the distance loses a lot of the saturation. I think I'm gonna switch to my flat brush, just because that one was creating very specific marks that didn't look quite natural. And when you're painting something that far in distance, you definitely don't want to be painting any specific trees or anything like that. You're just putting in some indications of the tree-like structures in there, just to add some greenery to it. Okay, now let's do the shadows on the mountains. This is going to be sort of desaturated blue color with some red ochre in it to make it more bluish, more grayish. Yeah, I think a little lighter. And even lighter for the ones all the way back out there. We can use the same light blue sort of for a little bit of the lighter spots here. And now we can also darken a little bit of the green with some Prussian blue and whatever trees kind of were on the other side of the hill. In the shadow side would also get a little bit of the shadow color. Okay, and I think I can put even some highlights, very warm, very subtle highlights on the mountains, just to give some definition to this beautiful mountain structure so it doesn't look too flat. So trying to make it not be very yellowish, because we want to preserve more highlights for our foregrounds. It needs a little bit more orange tone to it. Yeah, that's a little better. Okay, I think that looks good. We can start moving a little bit closer. Start working on the midground. So I'm gonna start with this hill on the left, and since the sun coming from the left, this hill is gonna be mostly in shadow. So I'm gonna put just a little bit of the highlight up on the tip here, and the rest of it is going to be in kind of a light green and blue mix. Still a little lighter. Still a little lighter. Because we want to preserve all the most saturated colors and all of the contrast. For the foreground. Oops, my camera stopped recording. Hope we didn't lose too much. Okay. One of the best ways to desaturate your greens is to add some complementary reds to it, so whenever you're fighting too much saturation in your green colors, you can just add some red to it. Okay, now moving on to the other hill that's on the right, and also the one that has more warmer colors. It's all gonna be in the sun. We are gonna create more the warmer green color for it. That's still kind of desaturated, so I'm still adding some of the yellow ochre to it so that it's not as saturated as when you mix it with yellow. And I'm making it a little bit lighter on the top. We can even make a little bit of an even edge and put it higher. And I'm making it lighter on the top because it's a bit farther away from us. As we're moving closer, we can add a little bit more of even warmer colors to it. And so it's always good to add some variety. I want to put some of the lighter greens in there. Maybe there's a grassy patch somewhere in there. And now I'm gonna mix a little bit of the darker, a little bit of the cooler green, because I want to add a little bit of the definition into this forest up on the hill. As if like there are some individual trees in there. The marks that are smaller usually indicate something that is farther away from us, so I put smaller marks up into the distance, and I kind of make bigger marks for something that is coming down closer to us. You can even put a few ones there. I'm not bringing this hill all the way down, just because we're gonna have trees growing on this side of the river anyways. I just want to add a little bit more of the highlight to this mountain here. Sort of just a few highlights on the grassy patches, a few highlights for the trees in there. Again, it's so far away, so we don't have to paint anything specific, but it just feels like it helps to create a little more interest in there. And it's also always good to variate your greens, creating a little bit cooler and warmer greens. So mix some burnt sienna into it, or some more blue in there. All right, that is good. Now I'm gonna work on this side of the trees, just because I don't want to be touching this side too much once I start working on these. So since the sun is coming from the left, these trees are sort of gonna be in the shadow on this side, but they're gonna have the highlights on the left side on them. So they're gonna be like a side lit. And I'm gonna mix dark green first, the shadow color first. And this time we can go much darker with our mix, since this is already almost like a foreground, even though the foreground is going to be these rocks, but this is still much closer to us now. So I'm mixing some green, some Prussian blue, and a little bit of red, ochre, and burnt sienna to warm it up just a little bit, so it's not too blue. Okay. Also remember, gouache dries a little bit later. So, let's just go. Whatever. Just gonna start putting the trees in there. It always helps to have a variety of the heights. So you kind of have more interesting design. Just gonna put a little bit more kind of the darks here on the bottom. As you can see, I'm not stressing too much over the details on the trees. I kind of let the brush do its magic. It's kind of old brush that's lost a lot of bristles. A lot of bristles are broken, worn off, so it's not very nice and neat, but it works to my advantage because it helps me with creating these interesting forms that are not sort of too thought out and more accidental in a way. Okay, so we've painted our shadows, and now we are gonna go with the highlights. So these highlights are going to be even warmer than the ones we used on the hill here. So I'm going to be using more yellow in our mix and even a little bit of the burnt sienna in there to make it a little more orangey. And with the same brush, I'm just going to go around the structures that we have here. Let me bring this, zoom in a little bit and bring it closer. Oh, so you can see this better what I'm working on. And I'm gonna mix a little bit of the green and just put a little bit of the mid-tone so we don't have such a high contrast of shadow and highlight. Okay, and just to add just a few more points of interest in there into the highlights. Like this. Now we can do the rocks. And again, we have to remember that this side is in the shadow, so we're not going to have as much saturation in there. And I'm gonna keep the midtones on the rocks also pretty cool, with just a light mix of white, yellow, ochre, and some blue, so that these rocks are not standing out too much. Oh, there's a lot of green got mixed into it. I was mixing it over a green mix that I already had on the palette. And a little bit of the darks. Again, I'm not painting anything specific, I'm just letting these random brush strokes kind of leave the indications of the rock structures. Rather than painting each rock individually. And I think I'm just gonna put just a few light marks in there, as if the sun was making its way through, just kind of in a few spots here and there. Okay, and let me zoom out a little bit. And now I'm gonna do the river. So the river is usually just the reflection of the sky, so we don't have to stress too much about it. We can mix the sky color that we use for this painting with a little bit of the shadow sort of around these rocks, obviously, and some spots of the highlight out in there. So when I mix the dark color for the water, I'm just adding some Prussian blue and also a little bit of this muddy green and grayish color that I use for the rocks. And I'm just gonna spray the palette a little bit. It's getting too dry. So as I put some darker blue color over here, this kind of looks more natural, because if it's a very saturated blue, it just doesn't really look real. The rivers tend to have a greener or a brownish tint to them, but never like ocean blue. And you see it kind of going back and forth between the mixes that I've created here. I'm gonna put some of this green as the reflection. And a little bit of the lighter green as a reflection of this mountain and these trees that we're gonna put over here. Okay, that looks good. And we just have these rocks in the front and these trees over here to paint. I'm bringing the fresh sheet of paper towel. As you can see, I'm mostly wiping my brush with paper towels. I'm just cleaning it with water when I'm switching my colors. Okay, so these trees are going to be all in the highlight, so we're going to be using more of this highlight green, yellowish green color. But I'm going to start with putting kind of a shoreline here in the front, since it's going to be highlighted. Maybe this a little bit of the sandy area, and some of the rocks here are also going to be lighter. You can just go ahead and put the shadows under these rocks right away. So as usual, just some blue and red ochre and a little bit of white. Maybe we can introduce some mid-tone into it too. Mid-tone is still going to be cooler than the highlight. Okay. Just like that, and let's put the trees, and I think we're gonna be done. Okay, so there are two ways to go about. You can either start with the shadow in between these trees and then the highlights, or do the highlights then the shadow. I think I'm gonna go with the shadow first. So I'm just mixing some of the green with blue and red ochre. A little bit of the burnt sienna in there too for these shadows. Okay. And I'm washing my brush because we have very contrasting colors. The dark blue and, the dark green and the highlight green. Just want to make sure Okay, the camera ran out of battery. Stop recording again. I hope there's gonna be some footage they're gonna be able to piece together after all this. Okay, let's finish the trees before the camera comes up with any more excuses to stop recording. I'm just putting some like mid-tone green in here. And I'll just go over with the highlights one more time. And then mixing some of my permanent yellow, yellow ochre, Naples yellow, just to create this light color. I'm gonna take a smaller brush because that one got too clogged up with all the paint, so it's not painting properly anymore, and I can't get the brush strokes that I'm trying to get. Still nothing too complicated. Just cleaning up this side a little bit. Okay, and we wanted to put one tall tree over here to kind of frame this painting. just put it in there. And I'm just going with the shadow green first. And again, just creating sort of indications of the branches. Not doing anything too complicated or too detailed. And now for the lighter green. And I think we are done with this painting. Now to my favorite part, removing all of the washi tape. Oops. Thank you guys so much for painting with me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed some of the tips that I shared and just the format in general of me creating a landscape and just painting from my imagination. If you have any questions or any requests for my future videos, please leave them in the comments down below, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!